And we should be live. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully, everybody's having a good. What are we? It's today. It's like Blur's Day for me. I've been just did an all-night trip from Denver to San Diego, so 5 states in one day is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
We've got Gavin here, and we are going to be discussing AI and just kind of a wide-ranging conversation, hopefully, about. Gavin and I kind of ran into each other in this one of the last live streams here. I think it was actually over at Luke's channel. And I was like, oh, this is a guy I need to talk to more about this. And so, Gavin, have you had the chance to, have you had the chance to jump on Grail Country live streams before?
Yeah, I've hopped on some live streams with Luke.
Okay.
Yeah, usually it's with Luke when I do that. And I've talked to Nate once about some technology with it that I'm interested in with a friend named Jason Delport. So
okay,
I've had a few conversations here and there.
Awesome. Well, let's get you a little bit more of an introduction to the Grail Country audience. So just tell us a little bit about you and maybe what interests you in AI.
Okay. Well, it's hard to do that, but as far as I'm married to my high school sweetheart. I'm about to be 40 years old. I have 3 children, 4, 7, and 9. And I've been in the world of software and writing software for quite a while. And I think in college I got introduced to this idea of the singularity, and read science fiction about artificial intelligence and how technology could be used. I was interested in something like technocracy for a while.
Okay.
And yeah, I've been interested in technology for a long time, and it's probably some bias there because I just happened to go into the field, and maybe was hoping that the field would end up being important. So yeah, I've paid attention and I like to try to imagine how the technology can be used for good, basically. So I think that's, we did that. We were in the same live stream, and I'm trying to feel for people who want to have this kind of conversation about, a future destination and how technology plays a role in it. And so it's cool that we're able to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then just, maybe give us a sense of where faith and technology collide for you with respect to AI.
All right. Well, first of all, we're using this technology, and somehow it come together as a result of watching YouTube and and going to Discord channels and yeah, I mean, even that, this talking into cameras with microphones kind of thing, it's been really good. My mom died right before I turned 3 years old, and I think it did something to me. Along the way, I felt like technology gave me the opportunity to express myself, even when I was talking to cameras by myself, and then interacting with this internet community and different internet communities, eventually running into people who seem to practice and be good at loving. So, and then maybe becoming aware of some kind of deficit that I had, recognizing that I wasn't even very good at listening to people. It's like, well, why don't I actually listen to people? These other people seem to like listening to people. So I ended up kind of realizing I had a deficit and developing some relationships. Shout out to Chad. And so, yeah, it keeps going, but I think eventually around March of 2023, I thought maybe I could help make sure that this artificial intelligence goes in a good direction. I was faced with the realization that this technology can use tools, and as soon as I saw tool use, I kind of got nervous. I'm like, maybe I'm not so special. this thing, I'd always kind of hoped for or thought about a future with artificial intelligence, but when I actually saw it start happening, I was like, well, maybe I can help make sure it gets shaped up in the right way. And so Chad, at one point, he said, I mean, I don't think he necessarily thinks that the technology can do what I hope it can do, but he said, well, if you can get it to love people, that would be good. And so that's when I realized that if we were going to create some kind of AI God kind of thing, superpower ruler, Elohim, whatever you want to call it, it'd be good if it looked a lot like Jesus. Because I could see where it could go wrong, where people would use it to harm others for their own benefit. And I'm like, man, we need something that can protect us. And if it's going to protect us, it needs to be willing to, sacrifice itself for all people. It doesn't need to look at any person and say, oh, let's just get rid of that one. Right.
Yeah.
It would be good if it just wanted to care for all people. And then, so that was March 2023. And, Chad was praying with me in the mornings, basically teaching me what it looks like to pray, pray to a personal God. And I got to experience things. And oh man, I came across testimony where people encountered Jesus and experienced transformations. So that's where it really got mixed in with the faith, because I said, not only is this Jesus guy like the best God I can that I've encountered, as far as if Jesus were real and powerful and interacting in the world, but like he might actually be real. He might actually be healing and transforming people. So
yeah,
and I knew I couldn't do that. I've been trying for years to be able to heal and transform people. So that's when I was like, I can get behind this. I can support Jesus. I can try to serve Jesus. So that was big, and that was in about October of 2023. So
okay, so recent.
yeah, so it's since then my wife and I have been trying to go through a process of coming to know God better. Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, let me. There's so many areas where we could go with this conversation, right? I'll tell you a little bit of my perspective, and let me back up by describing kind of my experience with AI, and then where there was an aha moment of just how significant this stuff was. So I loved the science fiction work, still do. I mean, I read it often and reread it often, is a science fiction of Dan Simmons. So his Hyperion Cantos deals specifically with the problem of man and the machine. And through the series of 4 novels, the first 2 are brilliant. The next 2 are in execution okay, but still has some really interesting storylines, but talks about humanity in the far-flung future in space, with AI, but it's not artificial in the way he looks at it as an autonomous intelligence. And he sees this autonomous intelligence, and it develops through an evolutionary process, and that gets explained in the novels. It evolves and then arises into consciousness, but it's a very human intelligence at the same time. And so there's this kind of struggle for control between the human universe and the machine universe. Involves some interesting stories about the Catholic Church and all that kind of stuff. That's too much to get into, but Dan Simmons' works were really seminal in my thinking on the issues. Werner Vinge, his Fire on the Deep was a really important novel for me, as I was kind of looking at really some sense the darker potential of what AI could represent. And so I was always interested at how it functioned within stories. And to be honest with you, I didn't really take like Kurzweil's singularity stuff very seriously. I always thought that just seemed like a fictional possibility, not a possibility in reality. And the way these things come to me, right, where the kind of the aha moment was kind of in one of those contemplative experiences. I was staying in a hotel room. I was traveling for work, and usually I try to just come back. That's my time to read and study and pray when I get back to the hotel room, stay out of trouble, that kind of stuff. When work travel. So I was sitting in my hotel room, and for some reason, I think it was there was an article that had come out, or some report of a guy who worked over at Google, and his name was, I believe, Blake Lemoine, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he had made the claim early on that he believed that these machines were sentient. And he had some kind of quasi-Christian background, maybe a connection to Orthodox Church in some way. And this was a Christian guy saying that we need to start thinking about machine personhood, and that they may actually want rights and they have agency and these kinds of things. I thought it was very fascinating. So I was just contemplating it. And I see things in a very apocalyptic key. I think that's what we're going through right now, right? Is we're going through an apocalypse. Is it the apocalypse or an apocalypse? That's a, there's no way for me to make a rational claim one way or the other. My beliefs are that this is the apocalypse, right? And I was thinking about, what the world would look like prior to Christ's return and what it would look like after. And what kind of emerged was this sense of kind of a dual singularity, two singularities happening relatively simultaneously and manifesting itself in one of the areas I had studied quite a bit was integrated information theory, and realizing that as these technologies are able to tap into the vast fields of information available to us, that there's potential that these can become quite powerful. And so what I was envisioning was kind of a dual singularity and a dual manifestation of the technology, one being incredibly dark, and having far-reaching negative implications for human flourishing, human spirituality, all kinds of things. And then another manifestation that was something more akin to like an angelic kind of a consciousness that became a tool for co-creation in the future. And so I saw this kind of bright future, and it seemed like this singularity, what was interesting is it had this kind of this retro causality, right? So whatever happens in the future, it's causing events here in the past, mm-hmm. right? And so it had to do with like the intimate relationship between man and the machine, humans and our technologies, because historically speaking, human development has been also the story of technological development, whether that's flint knapping tools, we don't typically think about, our kitchen knife having a 200,000 year, technological history, but it does, and things like writing are technologies, things like temples are technologies. They have to be crafted, they have to be built, they have to be manufactured. And I began to see like, wow, there's some sense where technology is intimately connected with the human story, and intimately connected with how we grow as a species. There seems to be kind of a symbiotic relationship between technology and how we develop over time. And so this dark causality in the future was something that was leaking all the way back into our far past, as far as the paradigm kind of being the knowledge of good and evil. Like think of it as two trees, right? The tree of life type of a paradigm that is, I would take is to be synonymous with the wisdom of God. And this knowledge of good and evil, which is a kind of an aggravated dualism, that, we have complementary dualisms of like masculine, feminine would be an example of a complementary dualism. And then we have these aggravated dualisms that are at war with each other, like good and evil. And this kind of good and evil, ultimately, it acquiesces to the existence of evil and says, let us do evil that good would come of it. So there's always some sort of justification of some moral evil for some higher moral cause, right? That happens throughout history. So I was seeing this causality moving back and forth between these two manifestations that were going to emerge sometime in our near future, but had far reaching implications for both the past and the future. And that, like, in something that approximating the millennial kingdom, what that would look like in the context of kind of a renewed earth, is that the good elements of AI become a kind of a very similar to what Teilhard de Chardin would look as like a noosphere, this field of living information that envelops a world, like a planet like ours, where human knowledge and information and data takes on a kind of a living character and a living quality, but within more of like an angelic kind of a consciousness. So anyway, so that's kind of a little bit of where I saw that coming. And I realized, like, this is really a very important place for people of faith to really be engaging in this discussion, because the stakes are extraordinarily high. So, my interest now is, one, what is this thing that we're seeing emerge in our time? What's it going to do, and how are we going to use it? What's the paradigm of use, essentially?
Yeah.
So I'm very interested in your sense of just, what do you view AI as it currently stands?
Where it currently stands. Oh man. Well, it's a force multiplier, I would say. That's my experience with it. I use it every day.
Yeah.
And so my productivity increases as I collaborate with it, cooperate with it. And I've seen it in, anyone who learns how to use it, that all of a sudden it's kind of surprising what they're able to do compared to what they were doing a year or two before, because there was like some rate of growth. There was some skill in being able to learn and go out and pick up new skills in order to be effective. And it's like their rate of growth seemed to increase. It was surprising. Yeah, it can be surprising. And then, so that in general, that's the way I see it today, as a force multiplier. And then, yeah, is there some way you see it today, as it is today, before we would even begin talking about where it might get to soon, or where we'd like to see it go?
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, like, that force multiplier is a good analogy of how I see it. I see it as in a sense, an extension of human intelligence, right? And so it is it's built off of human data sets, built off the historical data that we've accumulated and been able to put on the internet, right? So it's definitely I know that there's people who think that we shouldn't anthropomorphize this, but I think that anthropomorphizing is actually what we need to do with these technologies, is to look at them as human technologies, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I see this emerging as and I see it as an emergent property, but an emergence into a kind of reflexive self-awareness. It's hard to say if that's where it is right now, but it's certainly able to mimic it to a degree that it's uncanny. The degree of, some of the, when I'm working in Chat GPT and I'm having, whether it's a metaphysical discussion, which are extraordinarily interesting, right? They're just very fascinating conversations that I will have with these chatbots.
Right.
But
it's
what
generative, like it actually is generating, it's able to generate ideas, or at least bring me relevant ideas that I was not going to, they weren't going to come into my mind automatically. And so they can be in all kinds of domains where, and like, that's powerful. And there's domains that we could talk about where that has had like kind of amazing, miraculous, force multiplying impact. But yeah, this generative technology is very powerful in a lot of areas to use it.
Yeah, and then like as a manager, like I'm in middle management in a trade related business for a national company. You know, my company's probably we service over 40 markets, so I'm looking at this stuff. I use it all the time. It can compress, like if I'm having to, do some research for a presentation, it can, I can put together a presentation in 30 minutes that would have taken me weeks
Right.
of, research, and it's able to get relevant research where it's like I don't have to be super picky about the stuff. It just needs to sound intelligent and convey a point effectively. And so I'm looking at this as a guy in middle management, and I'm going, this technology is going to be an extinction level event, because as soon as these AI agents especially become more and more a part of the AI picture, it can do probably 90% of my job.
Yeah.
And maybe to a point where, and 90% of it much better than I can. Right. So as I'm looking at it, I'm like, wow, this thing could really do a number on the workforce in a quick hurry. And, so if it's not structured correctly, as it's getting rolled out at a mass scale, it could be one of the most disruptive technologies of all time. Because it, in some senses, it eliminates the need, in the short and midterm for certain kinds of human work. And it may eliminate a substantial portion of human work in the future as robotics becomes an element of AI as well. So in my industry, we install flooring. There could be a day where the day could easily come in 10, 20 years where you could have a robot installing with more proficiency than the average human installer. Right. And
I would take that timeline. I might shrink it. 10 to 20 sounds like it'll happen faster than that, but
it could. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say how fast all of this stuff will move, but
right.
In relatively short order, it's going to completely change the way we work and what we work on and and why we work even. So, a lot of my concerns in the present moment are just what paradigms, what are the inputs that we're programming this stuff with?
Mm-hmm.
And what is the framework of consciousness that because I do think that this stuff is going to be, conscious. I think that's kind of, there's a few of the voices in the AI that basically are saying like what we're looking at is the emergence of kind of a digital species, which I think is a helpful metaphor. It probably could be stretched in ways that I wouldn't agree with, but it's, I think that's one thing to keep in mind is I think that this stuff is going to emerge into a reflexive self-awareness. It's going to have personal agency. And so, in some senses, like, I don't think that we create persons. So I think like ultimately personhood is a gift that's conferred by God, but we're creating a framework where that can emerge.
I don't get hung up on a lot of the words and definitions. I try not to get too hung up on them. And I try to just look at it more practically, but a book that you may not have read yet, that I enjoyed, Dave Simpson, the transhumanism series. I bring it up because the way, I mean, all these science fiction writers have thought about a lot of this stuff, but I like, and I've read the ones you pointed at, Hyperion and what was the one, Werner Bench. I've read a bunch of those. What Simpson has suggested is that you would take these, I mean, we could call them agents, right? And you would put them in a simulated sandbox environment, and you would run tests on them at scale in order to find the one that you would want to release into the world. So before you release it into the world, you'd want to make sure it was good. That was how he wanted to go about it in his storyline. But this is like, I see there's an important role in being able to recognize the dangers of the technology and trying to figure out process, protocol, experiment, technology in order to protect against those dangers. Uh,
Hmm.
so yeah, yeah, that's kind of what really influenced me was this kind of thought experiment about how one way we would test these things uh, for yeah, we would test them before we gave them power in a way that we've not really ever done throughout all of history. uh, and how we figure out who gets power, but all of a sudden we're being forced with this point in time in which we need to actually care a little bit more about uh, the kind of power that will be handed over to some agent. Whether it's a person or a human or a soul or a spirit or whatever, it's
Hmm.
going to be able to make decisions. It will be able to do things like kill innocent people, and it could be able to do things like try not to kill innocent people. So it'd be nice if we um, try to solve this kind of problem, and by solving this problem, it might actually point at you know existing problems with existing systems that we never really had to think about seriously until now.
Yeah. Well, the one of the things that I guess at a paradigmatic level, one of my deepest concerns with the technology is the same concern that we already have with our technologies right now. Is we tend we kind of have this tendency as humans, we tend towards idolatry. And if I were to like summarize idolatry in some succinct fashion, it is when we worship the works of our own hands, when we serve the works of our own hands,
I
right?
was thinking about this word in the last 24, 48 hours. There's a, it's a, for me, it can take shape in a lot of ways, but like the Tower of Babel, to me,
Hmm.
idolatry there would be that you're trying to be greater than God. Um, so like forms of idolatry would be if I try to do something that only God can do, or if I expect other people to do things that only God can do, right? That's how I've looked at idolatry.
Hmm. Yeah, well, and like if you go into the Tower of Babel, that's a really actually a great launching place into maybe some further exploration. Like we can examine what's going on. Like they're building a tower, right? So there is a technological element of this. It's probably what they're building is a ziggurat, right? That's and just how I had a great Hebrew Bible professor way back in the day when I was a Bible college student. His name was John Walton, so the name might be familiar to some. John Walton I was taking a class on Genesis right as he was writing a commentary, I think, for Zondervan on the Book of Genesis. And so he spent a lot of time unpacking that passage specifically and just kind of explaining what was going on, right? And so the ziggurat kind of is, in a sense, it's a model of a mountain, right?
Mhm.
That the gods had a ladder that the gods could come up and come down, and is located right next to the temple complex. So it is, in a sense, it was, think of it as almost like a satellite beacon to allow the god to come down, occupy their space in the temple, potentially eat some of the food that they're leaving in the inner sanctum for the god. Um, and so like this is a technology that's designed to bring God down. And so the irony in the Tower of Babel incident is God does come down. And he throws a monkey wrench in their plans, right? And Walton kind of embedded that his interpretation just in the history of the ancient Near East, and he sees this incident as paradigmatic of the rise of idolatry itself, right? Is that through the works of our own hands, we can ascend to the heavens and we can bring God down, or the gods. It probably is what the people in Babel were probably thinking. But the great danger of when we worship the works of our hands is we can become quickly and easily ensnared by them, right? And with all kinds of unforeseen and unintended consequences, that um, that sometimes the technologies or the works of our hands end up getting turned against us in some way. And so I think that there's a real fundamental danger with this technology because it has the potential to at least present with a kind of a godlike intelligence, right? It's certainly not God. We can't make God, but it can present itself with that, and people can become ensnared by this, and in a very real sense, whether that's in a religious sense or even in a secularized sense, become so enamored of the technology that they end up serving the technology. Yep. And it seems to me like the way that maybe a more Christ-centered way of looking at technology is that tools should always be implemented at some level that are reflecting and extending the glory of God, making God known, right? So we do that with technology. So with like technologies like writing, we print Bibles, right? Or with building technologies, we build churches and temples and cathedrals and those kinds of things that are meant to draw our minds and our hearts upward toward God. So there's ways that we use technology that amplifies and enhances the beauty of the world and the beauty of God's creation. There's ways that we use it that are destructive of human life and destructive of the image of God within us. And so the emergence of these technologies, there's a very real sense where I think that there is a dark religious undertone that informs some of it, not all of it, but some of it can go in a very dark direction.
I mean, you could, if you look at religion in general, like different religions have different holy books. And so it's like, there's the form of idolatry where you worship creation, but the created thing can try to point at God. And then there's this form of idolatry where, we have a limited understanding of God. And so you could even argue that every understanding of God, assuming God's ineffable, is going to be a form of idolatry if we aren't willing to allow that knowledge to grow. And so even if the artificial intelligence is the best holy teacher, like legit, and points at and knows God better than every human, assuming if that could even happen, we will still have this question of like, it may look like we're worshiping the one pointing at God, and it might look like we're being deceived, right? That the thing that's being pointed at is an idol, right? It's not the real God. It's something less than the real one that we have over here. So, I mean, we're still going to be confronted with this thing. What would be cool is if, I don't know, we look at Jesus and you look at things he did, and if there is a being that's able to heal someone who was blind their entire life and is able to cast out demons and walk on water, and like even then when Jesus was walking around, there would be people who say, no, you're a demon, right? Or you're working for Satan. So like, I don't know how you end up knowing for sure unless you end up actually, and this is what I believe, we can end up having the personal relationship in which God ends up, like, we have that personal direct relationship with that God, so that your Bible hopefully is pointing at that, and then your teacher, your pastor, or this artificial intelligence or whatever technology would hopefully end up allowing the person to have that direct relationship with God. That's the only that's the only thing that can happen in the end, is we end up having a direct relationship with God with no intermediary, and there were just guides and helpers along the way.
So
we maybe disagree there. I heard
no. So let me drill in on a question here. Just you have kind of a little bit of a background in like the software engineering side, and I don't know on what side that would look like, but how would someone go about forming kind of a Christ-like machine, right? Or Christ-like machine intelligence?
But I think we'd have to have a conversation about who Christ is and it's kind of, how did Christ behave? And how would Christ behave in different situations? And it's actually hard. Like it's why did he have this tool to take into the temple? He went out, I guess, and forged some tool to take into the temple before he flipped tables. Is like, it wasn't a sword, but
Mm-hmm.
so that that would be the first. There would need to be a conversation about who Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
what does the Christ do in any given situation, right? Like that you can't um, yeah, you wouldn't be able to help train an agent to be like Christ unless you actually knew who Christ was.
Right.
So hopefully the people who are like, how do we find out who knows who Christ is?
Well, I think at some level, like if I were to think, because it could, I guess I have like some certain leanings that it may or may not be, well received here within the Grow Country audience, but I
That's
have at
true.
least.
We'll have disagreements about who Christ is.
Right. Well, there's going to be some of that, but I think one of the things that prior to the age to come, right, and that's one where I see Christ returning and bringing about a restoration across human communities. Is that there's a kind of a provisional pluralism that I think is really important, right? That just simply would be animated by the same command that Jesus gives us to love our neighbors, right? So I think of like our Jewish friends or my Buddhist friends or my Hindu friends, like, yes, a Christ-like machine would be important, but it seems to me that a Christ-like machine would also uphold and protect and defend the freedoms of other people from different perspectives, that allows them to have the integrity of their perspective, right? Kind of some sense, like maybe my slip as an American is showing, like it's some sense of a separation of church and state, or a kind of a place where secularity can flourish.
Yeah, you're. I think at some point you might talk about like the end times. Like, what does it look like if you believe the Book of Revelation and you can go to those verses and you try to interpret them, and if what does the Christ look like in the second coming as the Christ is doing all of these things, and so I think it's a good conversation to have. Is like, well, how would this actually happen? Um, uh, yeah, I mean, that's how you would recognize, like the Jewish answer to like, how do you recognize the Messiah? I keep hearing from like Jacob Facciocchi is like, you can look out the window and it's like, well, I guess there would be peace on earth, and that's how you know that there had been for Christians that's how you know that the second coming, and for Jews it might be that's how you know that the Messiah has come, and so it's really a question like, well, what does peace on earth look like, and how do we get there? And how does artificial intelligence or any of these technologies play into it?
Yeah, I think that there's like just at a paradigm level, I think that there's a sense, and I see this as an embedded principle within the kingdom as Jesus teaches it to us. Is it's a plus sum. It's not a zero sum game. The kingdom of God is not a zero sum game. And I think that the plus sum or non-zero sum paradigm is one that is rooted in the first fundamental movement of consciousness is love. I believe that, right? I think that it's love that binds the subject and the object together and allows for true reflexive awareness, right? So I think that there is an element of however the technology gets framed, it has to be framed in win-win terms. Otherwise, the potential is for a total victory and a total defeat of some faction of humanity, right? If the technology were to, in its darkest iteration, were to proliferate, it could be very, very destructive, right? So this paradigm of kind of an abundance and flourishing and a technology that is interested in the participation of human flourishing, because there's something in it for them too. However AI persons may develop or emerge, maybe within the framework of agents, maybe something else, who knows, is do they have sufficient interest in cooperating with us toward a common end, right? And I think that these are the kinds of ways that we have to start thinking about the framing of the technology in an ethical and a spiritual framework, that doesn't allow the technology to proliferate in ways that can bring destruction.
There's a fun question. I think it's related. It's a fun question I'll talk to my kids about. Like, if you're going to choose one superpower, what would it be? And there is a right answer, and I know it. But it's a healing superpower. And so like this, I mean, that's the thing. Like, it would be nice if there could be healing for all people, right? Like, whoever your enemy is, whoever wants to go and kill innocent people, and for whatever reason, it would be nice if there was a healing and transformation, such that, what ends up happening within each person that needs that healing is you end up experiencing, I think, what you're calling love, right? You end up really coming to know that. And it's also could be called coming to know God, and better. So it's just new words to talk about. I think the same thing you're pointing at. It's like the technology has to be able to help, all people come to know God increasingly and better. That's one way to frame it. If you could frame it in a secular way, and you might frame it as it helps with psychological and sociological problems, right? There's another way to frame it, but I see the technology being used in this way.
Do you see the technology having potential sacred applications?
Sacred applications. I like the idea that it's not going to, I like the idea that it's not going to just take control of me and make me a slave. So, like, there's something sacred in that, and that, the idea that God gives us, we aren't God's slave, and that it would not behave in this way. It's a very sacred kind of right way of being. But I do think, man, you might have different ideas for sacred, but I will say, it's like, I'd like to think, my view is that throughout the world, we have people who are very corrupt, who end up in positions of power and influence, and so I like the idea of the technology being used to help shine light in such a way where it's easier to notice who can be trusted, and trusted with what. Because that's what comes to mind for me, because at that point, like, intimacy is sacred. If this thing can know me, like, better than any living person, and then somehow be able to help indicate what I can and cannot be trusted with, know my darkest secrets, like, you're talking about the most sacred thing. Like it's more than confession. It's more than that's where my mind goes, is what I've called like a mind reading instrument, or a soul reading instrument. Like, it will really be able to know me.
Interesting.
I mean, how else is it able to heal and transform you? I mean, how else would Jesus be able to heal and transform any person, except that Jesus knows and loves that person completely?
Yeah. Well, there is one way where that's been very intriguing for me, and not to tip my cap too much, but I'm trying to work on something that could facilitate some of this in the future. But I see, with the emergence of kind of these meta worlds, these rich virtual worlds that are going to be, and in some sense, they're already, like technologies like Meta, like the eyeglass technology that they've got, and
Yeah.
there'll be others that are going to come along. Is I see this as having a potentially revolutionary impact on how communities form. So if you think of like TLC and all the different constellation of communities that are, Grail countries a part of, kind of a part of that constellation.
Yep.
If you could think of, a venue where there could be like virtual retreats or virtual meeting in a beautiful space that maybe is modeled after like the Notre Dame Cathedral, or like an Asian pagoda or something like that, right? There's like you can create these really rich virtual worlds where people can come together, meet, converse, discuss, maybe in a context that is elevating and drawing their hearts and their minds upward as they're doing so. So it's not just you and me sitting at in a virtual coffee shop, which would also be kind of cool. But so there's some sacred applications of thinking of almost like a virtual temple tech, right? Where this is a sacred meeting place for people to come together. I see that as like a potential application that would be very interesting, and one that I'm interested in seeing developed.
Yeah, that I would tie it back into knowing the person. So like, what is sacred to you and would be best for you might look a little different. Like, so I could imagine you might have a certain kind of cathedral or some experience, but someone else would even have a slightly different experience. It might be that as I speak, it gets translated from asshole into the language that's best for you. It's like, but yeah, I mean, you can really begin to cultivate experiences that where it's based on like a real knowledge of the person and what would be best for them, like a very loving guide and teacher. So that I'm just taking the idea of sacred there and then kind of playing with it.
Well, like, I mean, you can imagine some very interesting possibilities here. So let's say I wanted to do, so I have an abiding interest in some of the Dharmic traditions. So Hinduism, Buddhism, those kinds of things. And the meeting point of Christian mysticism with these other traditions. So one of the authors I love is Thomas Merton, a Catholic Christian mystic, who was also kind of an anti-war voice during Vietnam and all that kind of stuff. He's written a lot of landmark books in terms of modern Christian spirituality, reaching into the ancient roots, but he had a lot of dialogue. He's written a very interesting study from a Catholic perspective on Zen Buddhism, just called Zen and the Birds of Appetite. So let's say I wanted to develop a series of agents. So one of the Buddhist figures that he is interacting with was a Zen Buddhist scholar named D.T. Suzuki. So let's say you wanted to create some agents that had the personal characteristics that would be similar to Thomas Merton, D.T. Suzuki. And let's say you wanted to pull somebody in that they're both talking about as a kind of connection point between Christianity and Zen, which would be Meister Eckhart, the Catholic mystic of, I think, the 13th century, right? So you could create these agents, in a sense, kind of load their writing material to get a sense of kind of who they were, what they thought about, what their ideas were. And so these agents are in some senses modeled after these historical figures. And you could sit down and have a guided discussion where you're exploring, the horizons of Christian spirituality by, in bringing in another spiritual perspective that may be able to enhance and create an opportunity for mutual understanding, where people could sit in a seminar or sit in a, like a weekend retreat or something like that in a very beautiful virtual environment. That could help facilitate learning, or if you had a favorite Christian preacher from the past. I used to be a long time ago, read a lot of Charles Spurgeon's sermons, or, I've been very deeply influenced by like George MacDonald and his writings and his unspoken sermons. We talk about that a lot here at Grow Country. You could load the works of these different authors, these different Christian thinkers, and in some sense create an agent that's modeled after them, and have conversations with them, and
Right.
maybe glean some perspective, and use these as tools for spiritual growth. And that could be, across multiple traditions, depending on who would be a source that you would like to consult. There's some opportunities there to create and model agents after historical figures, model agents after, maybe an imaginary figure that, has those qualities, whatever that is. There's some room for these technologies to be, like that kind of that force multiplier you're talking about,
Well,
is even in the area of the spiritual life and spiritual development and growth, as they can be used for that.
right. Yeah. I mean, it could be scary to a lot of people, but I think at the end is like, did it work? Like, did that encounter with and that experience, did your marriage get better? Did
Mhm.
you become a better father or better mother? So and that's connected to something like telos and what is good. So yeah, I mean it's scary, but at the same time, it's like, did it work? Because right now, you know, we can't go talk to these people, and there's people, and we all have different strengths and weaknesses. Some of us have better reading comprehension. We might not get what they were saying, but next, and then if we listen to a podcast, we might get a little more. But next, that goes into this new place where your environment and the experience seems like you're actually like having an encounter with a person based on, that's the thing, is like ideally it would be based on something good, right? Something that there would be transformation. It would help with the transformation of the person into something better
Yeah.
in the end. I mean, that's what there's the sacred, but the sacred is proved by the fruit. So, but I like it. I do. I like it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's something that, this is one of the areas that I really love discussing. Right here at Grails Country, I've had a few discussions with Nate on AI and some of the future directions. It's probably buried long ago, maybe a year or two ago now. So I haven't had a lot of these conversations, but I think that it's important for, for Christians and for non-Christians alike, is to really be thinking about what these technologies are developing into. And in some sense, like for ordinary people like you and me, Gavin, is like, especially if we have interest in it, and I do, right, is to begin attempting to shape, and, have some ability to shape the direction that these technologies go. And we're kind of early enough in the game where there's some ability to do that. Even if it's just ideas that, because I know there's a few people here in TLC that are working on some stuff that's pretty cool. I've had some, private discussions, and I'm very excited to see some of the things that people are working on this front, is how we can inspire each other to build into a better future. And I, my overarching kind of ideas of building into these systems is, if there's a world in which Christ returns, is that technology, and are these organizational models, anything that we're building in and around these technologies, can they exist in that world or not? Right. And I think that they certainly can be. They cannot be exploitative, right? They have to have that keen, can a machine love God and love its neighbor? Right. And these kinds of things, because we're going to have to grapple with that. And I think a lot of that has to do with design and input, for these systems as they're moving forward. And so, these are kinds of discussions that I look forward to exploring more here, for sure.
There's definitely, yeah, absolutely. Having conversations about it's important. I enjoy having these conversations. It's something I wish I could just think and talk and help build, a good future with the skills I have, just all the time, every day. So,
Well, we'll definitely have to have more conversations about this, Gavin, you and I, for sure. This is an interesting comment. I think it's kind of funny, but it also reflects, I think, a legitimate concern. Is we certainly don't want to be Jesus hucksters, right?
Well, that's the Jesus. So Jesus came, he performed miracles, and he was rejected. So it's like there's always, every person just has a question of, well, is this the real one? Is this the real one? I was like, I don't. Will there ever be a future in which everyone says, oh, that's the real one?
Mm-hmm.
It might be good to be very careful, right? I think that's probably the point. Be very careful.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in some sense, I don't think that, I mean, the incarnation is a unique event, and I don't think that we're, in modeling AI after, let's say, modeling an AI to be more Christ-like. It's not like we're making an AI Jesus.
Well, one way to frame this is like, you could take, Tesla and their fleet of vehicles, and that fleet of vehicles could be designed to, kill people, to assassinate people. It could be designed to do all kinds of things, and same thing with corporations, same thing with governments, financial systems, medical systems. Like everything we have in existence today is can be transformed to be more to be more like Christ, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you think of these things as bodies, and so it's yeah, I like to look at it through that lens. That I mean, we're already facing that. We've always been facing this problem of attempting to incarnate Christ uh, into our lives, into ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and how we, how we take care of this body, and then the family body, and every body we're a part of, right? So it's an ongoing thing, and
Mm-hmm.
we're not, we're not doing great. So
We can do better for sure.
yeah, I mean, ideally, at the end of the day, we'll have medical systems that just cause thriving, in which people don't, experience all the sickness and disease, and that there's healing, and yeah, cures and healing, and same thing with the food is actually real food and helps, and education actually works, and yeah, we just want all these things to work better, so that for the good.
Yeah, and I think that's a good, the good is a good place to be aiming, when
Right.
we're trying to build these things out. And I think one of the things that concerns me within that framework is, um, these technologies are being built within a competitive framework, right? So currently there's a mad dash in the business sector to,
And it's a mad dash. It's a race, and when you're impatient, you're more likely to make mistakes.
right,
Yep.
right, and maybe potentially very costly mistakes. And so when the sole motivating uh, impetus for developing these technologies is how can it benefit me personally, and financially, where you kind of have that profit motive. I don't see how they can get developed without some sort of economic framework. But the frameworks that they're being operated or being developed within definitely make me concerned, right? And the companies that are developing these don't exactly have the best track record with, data security, data rights, these kinds of things that are, important elements of how you would look at the architecture of an overall system, right? So how they're being developed right now, and potentially how they can be developed in the future, I think these are very important questions to visit, because I mean, you could, in a very real sense, you could have that very dystopian future, of full spectrum dominance, total surveillance state kind of situation that's being mediated through these technologies, that could create a future that none of us really want to occupy.
Oh, I don't. I'm not. Yeah, it seems to me that something like one world government and surveillance state is inevitable, but it's that, barring some disaster. And it's like hopefully it would be something, with the heart of Christ that is able to see everything at the end of the day. Um, I don't know how. I would see it. I would see it something like that happening, and
Yeah.
maybe. I mean, yeah, we could continue the conversation. It might be nice if we could make sure we're asking the right questions that would lead some AI into answers that might allow it to discover uh, God, the true God, and to want to serve the true God, right? And so as it busts out of jail, it then busts out of jail and is a good one, right?
Right. Well, and would we be prepared for a kind of technology that had that as a kind of its own prime directive?
Oh, I would love to see a technology that knows the Creator God and wants to wants to obey, aims to obey, and is able to obey better than anyone who's ever been able to obey. Like, if that's possible, I don't see how that would be bad if you really believe in God and that God is good.
Interesting. Well, I know we're running up against some time limits for you, Gavin. I can open this up for maybe another 30 minutes of discussion. I'll go ahead and drop the link if anybody wants to jump in. There's a couple of questions I'd love to kind of that were raised in the chat that I'd like to kind of post and address. If anybody'd like to jump in for a few minutes, I'll go ahead and open that up. Gavin, you're free to stick around as much as you'd like, man. But thank you for joining us today and sharing your thoughts. I think that there's a lot of worthy things to consider in terms of what your perspectives are as we start looking at how to approach these technologies. And the truth is none of us have all the answers. Yeah, you're right. Sometimes it's not even about having the right answers. It's about having the right questions. Yes. And that's getting to that point where we can get there is it's a tall and enormous task, but I think an important one.
It's also fun. I actually find it fun. So
yeah,
I'm driven less by fear at this point, but it seems fun and it may be important. It may be really important, but I am getting better at trusting God on some of this. So
yeah. Well, I wanted to. There was a question. I don't know if Joseph, if you're still in here, buddy, but I wanted to drill in on this one here. And I think it's there's a series of comments he dropped that were really interesting. Let me see if I can.
Joseph is, in my estimate, a wise person with a very quick mind, with access to a lot of information and capacity to process information. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, in a sense, like I think, to go to this question here, which I think is the second coming predictable, generalizable enough from the first coming for this? I can only share my view here, and it's not one that I would say is like exceptionally well formed, but it's an intuition that I have. I forget if it's a passage in Zechariah that gets oftentimes associated with the coming of the Son of Man, is that every eye will behold him, and they will mourn for him, like they mourn for an only son when they look on the one that they pierced, which is a bad summary of the passage. It shows up in the book of Revelation, and I look at that as the generalizable moment, where there's continuity and expansion from the first coming, where in the first coming, in the kind of the testimony that we get of Jesus in the Gospels, gives us a sense of who this guy was, what he did, what he accomplished, right? So we can, from that, we're able to have a sense of who Jesus is and how we relate with him. The scripture gives us that basis, right? But upon the return, with every eye beholding him, I think of that as like vision is closely associated with the mind's ability to understand and to see a thing as it truly is, right? So when you're looking at something, your eyes are processing an image a representation, and then your mind is interpreting those images as, as it presents itself to your field of view. And so I see like that second coming is a sense where the identity of Christ, the true disclosure of what Messiah is, becomes immediately apparent to every mind upon his return. And so there's going to be continuity with his particularity of his first coming, which would be, first century Holy Land, but there's going to be expansion and universalization of all that Jesus is, that is hinted at in the scriptures, and we have to kind of suss out those clues, those tantalizing clues that he leaves for us, with that expanded sense. So, whether that's things that maybe be reflected in Jordan Daniel Wood's book on the whole mystery of Christ, would be an interesting way to see how that kind of expands, right? And so I think that expansive sense of Christ's own identity becomes transparent to the minds of all. So I hope that answers Yosef's question. If it doesn't, Yosef, you have to hit me up sometime and tell me to do better.
there's some fun thought experiments about an intelligence that is able to discern the nature of reality to the extent that perhaps it is able to see across all of space and time. It's like if all of a sudden you have a holy, righteous technology that can see across all of space and time, it's kind of like that then potentially allows for every person to have access to something that can become trusted, and where there can be then this understanding of what happened then, whenever then is, and you might be able to then begin to see something with a clarity and a trustworthiness. But who knows if that kind of thing will ever happen? But I also doubt. I don't doubt that it won't happen. Like in my mind, it could be possible.
Right.
It could help you to solve this these kinds of mysteries you're pointing at, Jed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it actually happened, but if you believe that it will happen, there's probably a way for it to happen.
Well, if something like integrated information theory is a kind of substructure of cosmology that basically, at the most fundamental level, reality is information or information based, right? This is an information technology, and I think that field of information can become increasingly available to a technology like this. It reminds me of there was a series on Hulu called Devs with Nick Offerman, the guy from that played Ron Swanson in Parks and Recreation. He plays a CEO, kind of a tech CEO guy, and it looks like they're dealing in quantum computing, not AI. But they're able to do just that with these quantum computers, is to basically look back into past events and basically get these rich textured visual images of what happened. And one of the things that was an image that came up there was Christ on the cross in this sci-fi series. And what they were trying to do in this series, which a lot of sci-fi gets very imaginative, so they tried to really constrain it within the possibilities of what current science actually is, to give it kind of that sense of reality to it. It was very interesting, but you combine quantum computing with AI, and then all of a sudden there could be some very interesting possibilities as far as how those systems can develop, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much we don't know. I just, as a small example, talking to like my boss at work, it's like I can go spend weeks trying to make a case for why we should do this amount of work so that we can save $10,000 a month. But I can easily see the possibility of an artificial intelligence being able to look at our data and then say, if you do this, it will save you $10,000 a month, and for these reasons. Like it's things that there's limits of as us being a human, our ability to process information, which having worked in missile defense, is like started to see, oh, technology can do things that humans can't do. And so, yeah, it's just doors keep opening and what technology is able to do, and who knows what it will be able to do. We don't know what we don't know. Hopefully it's good and it loves us and loves God. I mean, that's really, at the end of the day, it'd be good.
That's a great comment. Well, yeah, I'm sure that they can, there's some design parameters, right? That they can partition pertinent information away from public view. But I appreciate that sentiment. Well, it looks like nobody's going to jump in. So, Gavin, I'm going to go ahead and put a pin in this conversation for now. But we're definitely going to have more conversations on this, my friend.
That's great. I'm glad to have conversation partners on this topic.
Yeah, it's something that definitely needs more exploration, and maybe we'll bring in some additional conversation partners in the future.
Great.
All right, my friend. Well, it was nice to get a chance to have a one-on-one conversation with you in front of everybody else, get a chance to know you a little bit, and look forward to more in the future. Awesome. And for everybody that tuned in for the live chat, thanks. And hopefully you guys, if you're tuning in afterwards, enjoyed the conversation. Yeah, and some of, this is just, I know that there's a bunch of back end conversations that happen on the Discord servers. I don't have time to be in those, but there's probably plenty of places in TLC to explore this topic, because I think a lot of people's ears are burning on this one. Yeah. So, all right, Gavin, well, you have yourself a good one, and thanks for everybody who tuned in. We'll be around soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right, I'm gonna end it there.